The countdown has already started, not to Mars colonization, to the first catastrophic failure that kills everyone on the surface. Mars would kill you in 14 different ways before you finish breakfast. So why is everyone pretending this is anything other than humanity's most expensive funeral? And here is a question. If you could bring only one item to Mars, what would it be? And why? Comment down below. I'll pin the most creative answer. Now let's begin. You've seen the renders. Gleaming habitats under transparent domes, astronauts bounding across rust-colored terrain, children playing in Martian gardens. Space agencies and private companies paint Mars as humanity's insurance policy, our backup drive, the place we'll go when Earth becomes too crowded or too damaged. But here's what they're not showing you in those promotional videos. The reality of what surviving on Mars would actually demand. Let me take you on a journey through the actual science, the real engineering challenges, and the brutal physics that stand between us and a thriving Martian civilization. This isn't about crushing dreams, it's about understanding what we're truly up against. Because if we're going to send humans to another planet, we need to be honest about the obstacles. And some of these obstacles aren't just difficult, they might be insurmountable. Mars sits roughly 225 million kilometers from Earth at its closest approach and 400 million kilometers at its farthest. That distance alone creates cascading problems that touch everything from communication to supply chains to emergency response. But distance is just the beginning. The Martian environment is fundamentally hostile to human life in ways that go far beyond what most people realize. The atmosphere is less than 1% as thick as Earth's. Step outside without a pressure suit, and the low atmospheric pressure would cause the water in your blood and tissues to vaporize. You'd lose consciousness within 15 seconds. Death would follow shortly after. The temperature averages minus 63 degrees Celsius, though it can swing from a relatively balmy 20 degrees at the equator during summer days to minus 125 degrees at the poles during winter. These aren't the kind of temperature variations you solve with a good jacket. We're talking about extremes that make Antarctica look like a tropical paradise. Radiation bombards the Martian surface constantly, without a magnetic field like Earth's, and with only that wisp of an atmosphere, Mars offers virtually no protection from cosmic rays and solar radiation. If you stood on the surface, you'd absorb about 24 to 30 millisieverts of radiation per month. For comparison, astronauts on the International Space Station, protected by Earth's magnetic field, receive about 12 to 15 millisieverts over 6 months. A year on Mars would expose you to roughly the same radiation as getting 250 chest X-rays every single month. If you're finding this fascinating, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to create more in-depth content like this for you. The dust on Mars deserves its own discussion because it's not like beach sand or garden soil. Martian regolith consists of fine particles laden with perchlorates, toxic compounds that disrupt thyroid function and can damage human health even in small quantities. This dust is electrostatically charged due to the dry environment and low atmospheric pressure, meaning it clings to everything. During the Apollo missions, lunar dust proved to be one of the most persistent and annoying problems astronauts faced, and Martian dust would be even worse. This dust gets into seals, grinds away at mechanical components, coats solar panels, reducing their efficiency, and presents a constant contamination risk. Every time someone enters or exits a habitat, they'd bring dust with them unless elaborate airlock procedures were followed perfectly every single time. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and you're introducing toxic material into your living space. The gravity on Mars is 38% of Earth's. That might sound manageable, maybe even fun. Lower gravity means you could jump higher, lift heavier objects with less effort. But your body evolved over millions of years to function in Earth's gravity. Your cardiovascular system, your bone density, your muscle mass, even your inner ear's sense of balance, all calibrated for 1G. We know from decades of studying astronauts in microgravity that prolonged exposure to reduced gravity causes bone density loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, and changes to vision through increased intracranial pressure. The International Space Station requires astronauts to exercise approximately 2 hours every single day just to minimize these effects, and they still experience significant physiological changes during 6-month missions. Mars offers more gravity than the 0G environment of orbit, but we genuinely don't know if 0.38G is enough to prevent long-term health deterioration. We have data points for 1G, where humans thrive, and for 0G, where humans experience serious health problems. We have almost no data for the range in between. Mars colonists would be the experiment. Consider what this means for children born on Mars. Their skeletons would develop in low gravity. Their muscles would adapt to lifting their body weight in Martian conditions. Their cardiovascular systems would calibrate for pumping blood in a weaker gravitational field. If they ever wanted to visit Earth, could their bodies even handle the transition to full gravity? Would a person who spent their entire childhood on Mars be permanently trapped there, physically unable to return to humanity's homeworld? The psychological implications are staggering, but let's stay focused on the physical challenges for now. Because the gravity issue connects directly to one of the most fundamental questions about Mars colonization. Can humans reproduce there? Can a fetus develop normally in low gravity? We simply don't know. No mammal has ever gestated offspring in partial gravity. The few experiments conducted with pregnant rats in space showed developmental abnormalities, though these studies were limited in scope and duration. If human reproduction proves impossible or results in serious developmental problems, Mars can never be a true colony in the traditional sense. It would be a research station perpetually dependent on immigrants from Earth. The dream of a self-sustaining Martian civilization would die before it even began. Water presents another enormous challenge. Mars has water, primarily locked in ice at the poles and in subsurface deposits. Recent discoveries by spacecraft like Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter have confirmed substantial ice deposits even at relatively low latitudes. This is genuinely good news, one of the few aspects of Mars colonization that's more favorable than early estimates suggested. However, accessing that water requires energy-intensive mining operations. You need to excavate tons of frozen regolith, transport it to processing facilities, melt the ice, purify the water to remove perchlorates and other contaminants, then distribute it throughout your habitat systems. Every liter of water a colonist drinks, every liter used for hygiene, every liter needed for growing food or producing oxygen must be extracted through this industrial process. The equipment required for this operation includes excavation machinery capable of functioning in extreme cold and in a near vacuum, vehicles for transporting material, heating systems for melting ice, filtration and purification systems for removing toxins, and storage facilities for the processed water. All of this equipment must be maintained, powered, and eventually replaced when components wear out. Power generation on Mars becomes absolutely critical when you consider all these water processing needs plus life support, heating, communication, research equipment, and everything else a colony requires. Solar panels work on Mars, but they're less efficient than on Earth. Mars receives only about 43% of the sunlight that reaches Earth's surface. Dust storms can block sunlight for weeks or even months at a time, coating solar panels and drastically reducing their output. The massive dust storm of 2018 covered the entire planet and lasted for months. The Opportunity rover, which had operated for nearly 15 years powered by solar panels, lost contact during this storm and never recovered. Imagine a human colony dependent on solar power facing a planet-wide dust storm. You'd need enormous battery reserves to survive months without adequate solar generation, and batteries are heavy expensive to transport, and degrade over time. Nuclear power seems like the obvious alternative. Small modular reactors could provide consistent power regardless of weather conditions. NASA has developed kilopower reactors designed specifically for space applications, capable of generating about 10 kilowatts continuously for over a decade. A colony would need multiple such reactors, plus backups, plus spare parts, plus personnel trained to maintain and repair nuclear systems. The challenge with nuclear power on Mars isn't the technology itself, it's the logistics. Reactors are heavy, fuel is expensive to transport, waste disposal becomes problematic in an environment where you can't just bury radioactive material and forget about it. Your habitat volume is limited, your waste storage is constrained, and any containment failure could contaminate the areas where colonists live and work. Wind power is essentially useless on Mars. The atmosphere is so thin that even high-speed Martian winds carry very little kinetic energy. A wind turbine that would generate useful power on Earth would barely turn on Mars. Geothermal energy might be possible in specific locations where volcanic activity exists near the surface, but we'd need extensive geological surveys to identify suitable sites, and the drilling equipment required would be substantial. We're not talking about drilling a few hundred meters. We're talking about accessing heat sources potentially several kilometers beneath the surface. Every power generation system requires maintenance, replacement parts, and technical expertise. A solar array needs new panels when old ones degrade or get damaged. A nuclear reactor needs fuel replacement, cooling system maintenance, and radiation monitoring. None of these components can be manufactured on Mars initially. Everything must come from Earth at enormous cost. Speaking of cost, let's talk about the economics of Mars colonization, because the financial challenges are as daunting as the technical ones. Current estimates for sending cargo to Mars run between $100,000 to $200,000 per kilogram using existing rocket technology. SpaceX claims their Starship system could eventually reduce this to perhaps $10,000 per kilogram, though that's an optimistic projection assuming full reusability and high flight rates. A single human requires massive amounts of equipment and supplies for a Mars mission: your habitat module, life support systems, power generation, water processing, food supplies, spare parts, tools, communication equipment, medical supplies, radiation shielding, and the spacecraft to get there in the first place. Estimates suggest that supporting one person on Mars for 1 year requires approximately 10 tons of supplies, even with aggressive recycling and in situ resource utilization. At $10,000 per kilogram, which I remember is the optimistic projection, that's $100 million just in launch costs to supply one person for 1 year. Multiply that by a colony of 100 people, and you're spending $10 billion annually just on supply shipments. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly, no mission failures, no need for emergency supplies, no unexpected problems requiring additional cargo. If you found these economic realities shocking, you might want to check out my video Why the First Humans on Mars Will Never Come Back, where I explore the darker side of this equation. The truth is, the cost alone creates a powerful incentive to make Mars missions one-way trips. Check it out after this one. The link is in the description. The time delay in communication creates operational challenges that go beyond simple inconvenience. When Mars and Earth are closest, light takes approximately 3 minutes to travel between them. At their farthest separation, that delay extends to 22 minutes. This means a round-trip communication takes anywhere from 6 to 44 minutes. You can't have a real-time conversation. You can't call home to ask for immediate advice during an emergency. You can't troubleshoot technical problems with experts on Earth providing real-time guidance. Every decision must be made locally, every emergency handled by the people on Mars with whatever resources and expertise they have available. Compare this to the International Space Station, where mission control can communicate instantly with astronauts, monitor every system in real time, and provide immediate guidance during emergencies. ISS crews have the accumulated knowledge and experience of thousands of engineers and specialists available at a moment's notice. Mars colonists would be fundamentally alone. This communication delay also affects psychological well-being. Conversations with family and friends become exchanges of recorded messages rather than actual dialogues. You send a message, wait 20 to 40 minutes, receive a response, reply, wait again. The natural flow of human conversation becomes impossible. Imagine trying to maintain a relationship, comfort a grieving family member, or share exciting news when every exchange is separated by these enormous gaps. The lag also impacts entertainment and information access. Live sports, breaking news, trending social media, all of it arrives on Mars delayed by those same minutes. Colonists would exist in a strange temporal bubble, always experiencing Earth's culture and events on a delay, never quite synchronized with the world they left behind. Food production on Mars faces obstacles that make conventional agriculture look like a miracle of engineering. Plants need water, nutrients, appropriate temperature, atmospheric pressure, and light. Mars provides exactly none of these things naturally. Every single requirement must be artificially created and maintained. Growing food indoors requires pressurized greenhouse structures with transparent sections to allow light in, or, alternatively, enclosed growing chambers with artificial lighting. Transparent materials strong enough to maintain pressure differential while allowing light transmission are engineering challenges in themselves. They must withstand temperature extremes, resist degradation from ultraviolet radiation, and remain transparent despite the constant dust accumulation. The soil on Mars is toxic and nutrient-poor. You can't just dig up Martian regolith plant seeds and expect crops to grow. The perchlorates must be removed, nutrients must be added, and the soil structure must be modified to retain water and support root systems. This means importing soil amendments from Earth initially, or developing systems to process Martian material into something resembling actual soil. Plants also need appropriate atmospheric composition. Earth's atmosphere is roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and less than 1% carbon dioxide. Plants photosynthesize by absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, but they still need oxygen for respiration, and they need atmospheric pressure sufficient to allow proper gas exchange through their leaves. Creating an Earth-like atmosphere inside a greenhouse means importing or manufacturing massive quantities of nitrogen and oxygen. These gases are heavy. Transporting them from Earth is prohibitively expensive. Manufacturing them on Mars requires industrial equipment and energy. Nitrogen is particularly problematic because while Mars' atmosphere contains about 2.6% nitrogen, extracting and concentrating it from the thin Martian air requires substantial infrastructure. Lighting presents another challenge. Remember, Mars receives less than half the sunlight Earth does, and dust storms can block sunlight for extended periods. Supplemental artificial lighting becomes necessary, but growing enough food to sustain even a small colony requires enormous greenhouse space. Lighting all of that space demands tremendous amounts of electrical power. Research on the International Space Station and in Earth-based controlled environment agriculture gives us some data on space farming, but the ISS produces only tiny quantities of fresh vegetables for psychological benefit and research purposes. It's nowhere near self-sufficient. Astronauts still depend on resupply missions for the vast majority of their nutrition. Human nutritional needs are complex. We don't just need calories, we need complete proteins with all essential amino acids, adequate fats, including omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, a full spectrum of vitamins and minerals, and sufficient fiber for digestive health. Meeting all these requirements with a limited selection of crops grown in artificial conditions is genuinely difficult. Most proposed Mars agriculture focuses on staple crops like potatoes, wheat, rice, or soybeans that provide calories and basic nutrition efficiently. But a diet of only starches and legumes lacks nutritional completeness and becomes psychologically monotonous. Humans evolved eating diverse diets. We crave variety. A colonist eating the same dozen foods prepared in similar ways for years or decades would experience both nutritional deficiencies and severe menu fatigue. Animal agriculture becomes even more problematic. Livestock requires more space, more water, more food, and more complex care than plants. A single cow needs approximately 9,000 liters of water annually and consumes several tons of feed. Chickens are more efficient, requiring less space and feed per unit of protein produced, but they still need climate-controlled housing, appropriate feed, waste management systems, and veterinary care. Fish farming through aquaponics, where fish waste provides nutrients for plants while plants filter water for fish, seems promising for closed-loop systems, but it still requires significant infrastructure, expertise, and initial stock of fish. And you need to maintain genetic diversity in your fish population to prevent inbreeding, which means either importing new genetic material periodically or maintaining a large enough population that genetic problems don't emerge. Medical care on Mars represents one of the most sobering challenges of colonization. On Earth, when someone experiences a medical emergency, they can access sophisticated hospitals with specialized equipment, experienced trauma surgeons, extensive pharmaceutical supplies, and diagnostic tools ranging from X-rays to MRI machines. On Mars, your medical capabilities are limited to whatever equipment and expertise you brought with you. Consider a relatively common emergency, appendicitis. On Earth, this is a routine surgery. You go to the hospital, a surgeon removes your inflamed appendix, you recover for a few days, and you're fine. On Mars, you'd need a colonist trained in surgery, a sterile operating environment, anesthesia, surgical instruments, sutures, antibiotics for preventing infection, and pain management for recovery. If any of these elements is missing or inadequate, a routine procedure becomes life-threatening. Now consider more complex medical situations. What happens if someone develops cancer? Treatment often requires chemotherapy drugs, radiation therapy, specialized imaging for monitoring tumor progression, and oncologists with years of training. What if someone needs kidney dialysis? The machines are large, require consistent power, need regular maintenance, and consume substantial amounts of purified water. What about dental emergencies? A severe tooth infection can be fatal without proper treatment, but dentistry requires specialized tools, materials for fillings or crowns, and ideally imaging equipment for diagnosis. Pregnancy and childbirth present extraordinary medical risks. Even in developed countries with excellent healthcare, complications during pregnancy and delivery can be fatal. On Mars, you'd need prenatal monitoring equipment, ultrasound for checking fetal development, medications for managing pregnancy complications, and the capability to perform emergency cesarean sections if necessary. You'd need someone with obstetric training, neonatal care equipment in case the baby needs intensive care after birth, and pediatric expertise for infant and childhood health issues. Mental health care becomes critical in an isolated, confined environment where colonists face constant stress, danger, and separation from Earth. Depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, and psychological breakdown are significant risks. Treatment requires trained mental health professionals, private spaces for confidential counseling, and potentially psychiatric medications. But mental health care is as much art as science, relying heavily on the therapeutic relationship between patient and provider. A small colony might have one person with psychological training trying to provide care for everyone, including themselves, which creates obvious problems. Pharmaceutical supplies present a severe logistical challenge. Medications have expiration dates. They degrade over time, especially when exposed to temperature extremes and radiation. A Mars colony would need to stock enormous quantities of medications covering everything from antibiotics to antihistamines, pain relievers to antipsychotics, cardiac drugs to anti-inflammatories. But medications are heavy, and maintaining a comprehensive pharmacy means dedicating precious cargo capacity to drugs that hopefully won't be needed, but might be life-saving if they are. Manufacturing pharmaceuticals on Mars would require sophisticated chemical synthesis capabilities, quality control testing, sterile production environments, and expertise in pharmaceutical chemistry. The infrastructure needed to produce even a limited selection of essential drugs would be substantial, and you'd still be dependent on Earth for complex biologics, specialized medications, and new drugs developed after your colony was established. Blood transfusions illustrate another medical challenge. On Earth, blood banks maintain supplies of different blood types for emergencies. If you're in an accident and lose significant blood, you receive transfusions of compatible blood from donors. On Mars, your blood bank is the other colonists. You need to know everyone's blood type, maintain health screening to ensure blood safety, have equipment for collection and storage, and hope that when someone needs blood, compatible donors are available and healthy enough to donate. Radiation exposure creates long-term cancer risks that no amount of medical technology can fully mitigate. Every colonist would accumulate radiation damage over time, increasing their lifetime cancer risk substantially. Some of this damage would be repairable by cellular mechanisms, but some would lead to mutations that decades later develop into malignancies. A Mars colony would likely see cancer rates far higher than Earth populations, and treating those cancers would require the medical infrastructure we've already discussed as being extremely difficult to establish. Bone density loss from reduced gravity creates injury risks that compound over time. Weaker bones mean higher fracture risk from relatively minor accidents. A fall that would give you a bruise on Earth might break bones on Mars after years of living in low gravity. Treating fractures requires imaging equipment, orthopedic expertise, casting or surgical fixation materials, and extended recovery time during which the injured person can't fully contribute to colony operations. The question of medical ethics becomes profound when resources are limited. On Earth, we generally try to save every life using whatever resources are necessary. On Mars, tough decisions become inevitable. If someone develops a condition requiring extensive ongoing treatment that consumes disproportionate resources, how do you decide whether to continue that treatment? If medical supplies are running low and multiple people need them, who gets priority? These aren't hypothetical, philosophical questions. They're practical problems a Mars colony would face, and the answers would shape the moral character of Martian civilization. Genetic diversity in a founding population presents biological challenges that extend across generations. Small, isolated populations experience genetic bottlenecks where the limited genetic variation can lead to inbreeding, accumulation of harmful recessive traits, and reduced fitness over generations. Population geneticists generally recommend founding populations of at least several hundred individuals to maintain adequate genetic diversity, but economic constraints make establishing colonies that large extraordinarily difficult. Even if you carefully screen the initial colonists for genetic diversity, trying to maximize variation within a limited population, you're still working with a restricted gene pool. Over multiple generations, unless you're constantly adding genetic diversity through immigration from Earth, the population becomes increasingly homogeneous. Genetic disorders that are rare in Earth's diverse population might become common in an isolated Martian population. This connects back to reproduction and child development. If humans can successfully reproduce on Mars, each generation born there faces the combined challenges of developing in low gravity, accumulating radiation exposure from early age, limited genetic diversity, and the psychological impact of growing up in an isolated, confined, dangerous environment. These children wouldn't just be Martian residents, they'd be a new branch of humanity, shaped by their environment in ways we can only begin to predict. The social structure of a Mars colony would necessarily differ from Earth societies. When survival depends on sophisticated technology and everyone's cooperation, individual freedom becomes constrained by collective necessity. You can't just quit your job if you're unhappy. The colony needs your skills. You can't move to a different city if you don't like your neighbors. There is no different city. You can't drop out of society and live off the grid. There is no wilderness to disappear into, and self-sufficiency outside the colony infrastructure is impossible. This creates a social pressure cooker where interpersonal conflicts can't be resolved through separation. If two colonists despise each other, they still have to work together, live in close proximity, and maintain professional cooperation, because the alternative is mission failure. If someone violates colony rules or norms, what consequences are appropriate? You can't imprison them because you can't spare the space or resources. You can't exile them because that's a death sentence. You can't send them back to Earth because launch windows are years apart and the cost is prohibitive. Leadership structures face unique pressures. Democratic governance seems appealing, but emergency situations on Mars might require immediate decisive action without time for debate and consensus building. A purely hierarchical command structure might be efficient, but creates resentment and stifles the creativity and initiative you want from colonists. Finding the right balance between authority and autonomy in a small, stressed population living in mortal danger is genuinely difficult. Supply chains from Earth create vulnerability that extends to every aspect of colony operations. Launch windows to Mars occur roughly every 26 months, when Earth and Mars are properly aligned. If a critical component fails and you don't have a spare, you might wait over 2 years for replacement parts to arrive. During that time, whatever system depended on that component is offline or operating at reduced capacity. Redundancy becomes essential but expensive. You need backup systems for everything critical, spare parts for components likely to fail, and multiples of single-point failure items. But every redundant system adds weight, which adds launch costs, which adds financial burden. Finding the right balance between redundancy for safety and efficiency for cost creates constant tension. Manufacturing capabilities on Mars would need to expand over time if the colony hopes to reduce dependence on Earth. Initial missions might bring everything from Earth, but eventually colonists would need to produce their own spare parts, tools, construction materials, and eventually more complex items. This requires establishing industrial infrastructure, metal refining, polymer production, electronics manufacturing, precision machining, quality control, and skilled workers trained in each area. 3D printing technology seems promising for on-demand manufacturing, but current additive manufacturing has limitations. Print resolution affects precision. Material properties of printed items often differ from traditionally manufactured equivalents, and you're still limited to the raw materials and printer capabilities you have available. You can't print computer chips or advanced electronics using simple polymer printers. You can't print high-performance alloys without sophisticated metal printing equipment and appropriate feedstock. The technology base required for true self-sufficiency is staggering. Think about everything that goes into producing a simple smartphone on Earth. You need rare earth element mining, semiconductor fabrication, display manufacturing, battery production, assembly facilities, and that's just the hardware. The software requires programmers, compilers, operating systems, and applications. Now consider that a Mars colony needs similar technological sophistication across hundreds of different product categories, from medical equipment to agricultural tools, from habitat components to spacesuits. The psychological impact of living on Mars deserves deeper exploration because the mental health challenges might be more dangerous than the physical environment. Humans are social creatures who evolved in the rich, complex ecosystem of Earth. We're adapted to blue skies, green landscapes, the sound of wind in trees, the smell of rain, the feeling of sunshine on our skin. Mars offers none of this sensory richness. Imagine looking out your window every single day and seeing the same rust-colored landscape. No trees, no grass, no flowers, no birds singing, no insects buzzing. The sky is a pale butterscotch color during the day, never the deep blue you grew up with. The sun appears about 2/3 the size it does from Earth, providing a dimmer, weaker light. At night, you can see Earth as a blue dot in the sky, a reminder of everything you left behind. The confined living spaces would be similar to submarine or Antarctic research station conditions, but permanent. You're living in pressurized habitats that are probably smaller than a typical house, sharing that space with dozens or hundreds of other people. Privacy becomes a luxury. Personal space is minimal. You can't go for a walk outside to clear your head. Every excursion beyond the habitat requires suiting up in a bulky, uncomfortable spacesuit, going through airlock procedures, and accepting the risks of the Martian environment. The isolation from Earth creates a psychological distance that grows over time. Early colonists might maintain strong connections to friends and family back home through video messages and communication, but the 20-minute time delay makes real conversation impossible. Over months and years, relationships naturally drift. People move on, your friends start families, change jobs, experience life events that you're not part of. You become increasingly disconnected from the world you came from. Seasonal affective disorder affects many people on Earth during winter months when daylight is reduced. On Mars, you're experiencing permanently reduced sunlight filtered through habitat windows or artificial lighting. The circadian rhythm disruption, combined with confinement and isolation, creates perfect conditions for depression and other mood disorders. Interpersonal conflicts in confined environments can escalate in ways they wouldn't in normal circumstances. On Earth, if you have a disagreement with a coworker, you go home at the end of the day. You have separation, space to cool down, other friends and activities to provide perspective. On Mars, the person you argued with is eating dinner across from you, sleeping in the next compartment, and you'll be working together again tomorrow. There's no escape, no break, no ability to avoid people you don't get along with. Research from Antarctic stations, submarines, and long-duration space missions shows that even carefully selected, highly trained individuals experience psychological challenges in isolated, confined environments. Crew cohesion tends to decline over time. Conflicts emerge from trivial sources. People form cliques and factions. Communication with mission control becomes strained. Some individuals withdraw, becoming uncommunicative and depressed. Others become irritable and confrontational. The phenomenon called third quarter effect appears in many isolation studies. Around the three-quarters point of a mission, psychological problems tend to spike. People have been isolated long enough to feel the full weight of their situation, but still have substantial time remaining. The initial excitement and novelty have worn off. The end is visible, but not yet close. This is when depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, and psychological breakdowns most commonly occur. For Mars colonists, there might be no end to look forward to. If you've signed up for a permanent one-way mission, there's no countdown to going home, no finish line to motivate you through the difficult periods. You're not enduring temporary hardship for a greater purpose. This is your life now, forever. The responsibility and pressure on each colonist would be immense. On Earth, most people's work is important, but not immediately life-critical. If you have a bad day and don't perform well, there are consequences, but probably not fatal ones. On Mars, mistakes can kill people. A moment of carelessness, a lapse in attention, a failure to follow procedures exactly, and people die. Living with that level of constant pressure where your actions directly determine whether you and everyone around you survives, creates chronic stress that takes a severe psychological toll. Purpose and meaning become crucial for psychological well-being. People need to feel that their sacrifices and struggles serve some larger purpose. Early Mars colonists might draw meaning from being pioneers, advancing human knowledge, securing humanity's future among the stars. But what about their children, born on Mars without choosing it? What about the fifth generation of Martians, living in the same confined habitats, facing the same dangers, maintaining the same systems? Do they still feel that sense of grand purpose? Or does it become simply grinding survival? Cultural and recreational activities would be limited by space, resources, and the small population. On Earth, you can attend concerts, visit museums, play sports in purpose-built facilities, explore natural environments, experience diverse cuisines, attend festivals and celebrations. A Mars colony might have a small, common area with entertainment screens, limited exercise equipment, perhaps musical instruments or art supplies. Social events would be limited to what can be organized within the confined habitat, with the same few dozen or few hundred people you see every day. The absence of nature is profoundly unnatural for human psychology. Studies consistently show that exposure to natural environments reduces stress, improves mood, enhances cognitive function, and provides psychological restoration. Even viewing natural scenes through windows or in photographs provides measurable psychological benefits. Mars offers a landscape that is technically natural, but completely alien and lifeless. There's no evidence that viewing Martian landscapes would provide the same psychological benefits as Earth's living ecosystems. Some colonists might develop Earth sickness, a longing for their home planet that becomes psychologically debilitating. Imagine knowing you'll never feel rain on your face again, never swim in an ocean, never walk through a forest, never pet a dog, never taste fresh fruit picked from a tree. Everything you experience for the rest of your life will be artificial, recycled, confined. For some people, that realization might become unbearable. The moral weight of bringing children into such an environment raises profound ethical questions. Is it fair to create a new human being who will grow up in constant danger, confined to pressurized habitats, never experiencing Earth's ecosystems, and potentially unable to ever visit humanity's homeworld due to physiological adaptation to low gravity? Do children born on Mars without their consent to those circumstances have legitimate grievances against their parents for bringing them into existence under such conditions? Spacesuit technology presents engineering challenges that are easy to underestimate. The suits used for Apollo moon missions and current spacewalks are essentially miniature spacecraft, providing pressure, temperature control, oxygen, carbon dioxide removal, and radiation protection. They're bulky, stiff, and exhausting to work in. Astronauts on the moon describe the suits as tiring, restricting movement, and making even simple tasks physically demanding. Mars suits would need to be more advanced than moon suits because they'd be used more frequently for longer durations. Colonists would need to perform complex work while suited, potentially spending hours outside the habitat. The suits would need to be durable enough to withstand the abrasive Martian dust, flexible enough to allow useful work, and reliable enough that failure rates are acceptably low despite frequent use. Current spacesuit designs require extensive assistance to don and doff. Astronauts can't put on their suits alone. They need help from other crew members, and the process takes considerable time. For Mars operations, suits would ideally be easier to get into and out of, perhaps using rear entry designs where the life support backpack is also the hatch. But every design choice involves trade-offs between convenience, safety, durability, and weight. Gloves are particularly problematic. To maintain pressure, spacesuit gloves become stiff and difficult to articulate. Astronauts report that operating tools, manipulating small objects, and performing precise work in pressurized gloves causes hand fatigue and soreness. After several hours of work in gloves, astronauts' hands ache from the constant effort of gripping against the pressure. Some have lost fingernails from repeated trauma. Performing the detailed technical work that a Mars colony requires while wearing stiff, bulky gloves day after day would be genuinely difficult. Suit maintenance becomes a constant requirement. Seals need inspection and replacement. Fabric develops wear and tear. Life support systems require filter changes and component maintenance. The abrasive Martian dust accelerates wear on joints, seals, and any moving parts. A colony would need dedicated technicians focused on maintaining the suit inventory, facilities for repair and testing, and substantial spare parts because suit failure outside the habitat is immediately fatal. The number of suits required is larger than you might initially think. If you have 100 colonists, you can't have exactly 100 suits. You need spares in various sizes in case suits fail. You need suits in maintenance rotation being serviced while other suits are in use. You need training suits for practicing procedures. You probably need at least 150 to 200 suits for a colony of 100 people, and each suit is a sophisticated, expensive piece of equipment that eventually wears out and needs replacement. Transportation on Mars presents challenges for any colony hoping to expand beyond a single location. The Martian surface area is approximately equal to Earth's land area. That's an enormous territory to explore and potentially utilize. But traveling across Mars requires vehicles capable of operating in the extreme environment, and those vehicles need power, life support for occupants, navigation systems, communication equipment, and reliability despite the abrasive dust and temperature extremes. Rovers, like the ones we've sent to Mars, move incredibly slowly. Curiosity and Perseverance travel at maximum speeds of about 150 meters per hour, and typically move much slower as they carefully navigate terrain. Those rovers are unmanned, operated remotely with no time pressure and no human lives at risk. Crewed vehicles would need to move faster to make exploration and travel practical, but speed increases risks. A mechanical failure that leaves a crewed vehicle stranded far from the habitat becomes a life-threatening emergency requiring rescue operations. Pressurized rovers would essentially be mobile habitats, providing shirt-sleeve environment for occupants during travel. This means redundant life support systems, power generation or substantial battery capacity, radiation shielding, temperature control, and enough interior volume for crew comfort during potentially multi-day journeys. Such vehicles would be heavy, complex, and expensive. Each one represents a massive investment, and you'd need several to ensure redundancy and capability for rescue operations. Unpressurized vehicles where occupants remain in spacesuits would be lighter and simpler, but limit mission duration to however long spacesuits can sustain crew members. With current technology, that's measured in hours, not days. You could explore relatively nearby locations, but long-distance travel would remain impractical without developing suits with dramatically improved life support duration. Aircraft on Mars face the challenge of the thin atmosphere, providing very little lift. A helicopter that works on Earth would be useless on Mars. NASA's Ingenuity helicopter, which successfully flew on Mars, is an engineering marvel with enormous rotor blades spinning at extremely high speeds just to lift its tiny 1.8 kilogram mass in the thin Martian air. Scaling that up to aircraft capable of carrying humans or significant cargo presents formidable engineering challenges. Ballistic transport using rockets to hop between locations might be more practical than aircraft, but comes with its own risks and resource requirements. Every launch consumes propellant, creates risks of accident or failure, and requires launch facilities at both origin and destination. For regular transportation between established outposts, this might become feasible, but it would never be casual or routine the way air travel is on Earth. Communication infrastructure on Mars would need to expand as the colony grows. Initial missions might communicate directly with Earth using high-gain antennas, but multiple outposts spread across the planet would need a communication network. This probably means relay satellites in Martian orbit, providing coverage for surface operations and enabling communication between distant surface locations without each site needing direct Earth links. Those satellites need to be launched, positioned, maintained, and eventually replaced as they fail or become obsolete. Each satellite represents additional mass to transport from Earth, additional complexity in operations, and additional points of potential failure in the communication network. But without them, coordination between distant surface locations becomes impossible, limiting how spread out the colony can become while maintaining cohesion. The legal and governmental structures for Mars colonization remain largely undefined. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which most spacefaring nations signed, states that celestial bodies are the common heritage of mankind, and that no nation can claim sovereignty over them. But the treaty was written assuming exploration and scientific research, not permanent colonization and resource extraction. If a private company establishes a Mars colony, what laws govern that colony? Are the colonists subject to the laws of their nation of origin? What if colonists come from multiple nations? What if children are born on Mars? Are they citizens of Earth nations or something else entirely? If disputes arise between colonists, what legal framework resolves them? If someone commits a serious crime on Mars, who has jurisdiction to prosecute and punish them? Property rights become murky in an environment where the Outer Space Treaty technically prohibits appropriation of territory. If a colony invests enormous resources in developing infrastructure at a particular location, mining resources from nearby deposits, and building permanent structures, do they have any legal protection of those investments? Can another entity legally establish a competing colony next door and claim access to the same resources? International cooperation on Mars colonization seems both desirable and difficult to achieve. Pooling resources, sharing technology, and coordinating efforts would make colonization more feasible and less expensive than purely national or commercial efforts. But cooperation requires trust, transparency, compatible goals, and complex agreements about sharing costs and benefits. History suggests that achieving such cooperation across multiple nations and entities is extremely challenging. The environmental impact of Mars colonization is often overlooked because Mars appears barren and lifeless. But our understanding of Mars is still developing. We haven't definitively proven that Martian life doesn't exist. Microorganisms might survive in subsurface environments where liquid water occasionally exists. Contaminating Mars with Earth microbes before we've thoroughly searched for native Martian life could compromise one of the most profound scientific questions we can investigate. Planetary protection protocols currently govern missions to Mars, requiring sterilization of spacecraft to prevent biological contamination. But a permanent human colony makes complete containment of Earth microbes essentially impossible. Humans are walking colonies of trillions of microorganisms. Our skin, our respiratory systems, our digestive tracts all host complex microbial ecosystems. Waste management systems would need to completely contain all biological material to prevent contamination, which is extraordinarily difficult with current technology. If we do contaminate Mars with Earth life before confirming whether native Martian life exists, we potentially destroy or obscure evidence of a second origin of life. This would be a scientific tragedy of historic proportions, eliminating our best opportunity to study life that evolved independently from Earth's biosphere. The philosophical and practical implications of discovering extraterrestrial life, even microbial life, would be profound. Confirming that life arose independently on two planets in the same solar system would suggest that life is common throughout the universe. Conversely, if we thoroughly search Mars and find no evidence of life past or present, that's also scientifically valuable information. It would suggest that life's origin is rare, that Earth might be unusual, and that conditions suitable for life's emergence are more restrictive than we thought. Either answer, life found or definitively not found, advances our understanding, but contamination before completing the search leaves us in permanent uncertainty. The question of terraforming Mars, transforming it into an Earth-like world with breathable atmosphere, moderate temperatures, and potentially liquid water on the surface, represents the ultimate expression of Mars colonization ambition. In principle, terraforming might be possible. Mars once had a thicker atmosphere and liquid water on its surface billions of years ago. Perhaps we could restore those conditions through deliberate engineering. Proposed terraforming methods include releasing greenhouse gases to warm the planet, melting the polar ice caps to release water and carbon dioxide, importing volatiles from asteroids or comets to build up the atmosphere, and using photosynthetic organisms to gradually produce oxygen. These proposals sound straightforward in concept, but the scale of engineering required is almost incomprehensible. Mars' atmosphere currently has a mass of about 25 trillion kilograms. Earth's atmosphere masses approximately 5 quadrillion kilograms, roughly 200 times more. To give Mars an Earth-like atmosphere, you'd need to add staggering quantities of gas. Even if you could release all the carbon dioxide frozen in the polar caps and absorbed in the regolith, estimates suggest you'd only achieve a few % of Earth's atmospheric pressure. Importing volatiles from elsewhere in the solar system means redirecting comets or asteroids to impact Mars, delivering their water and gases. But each impact would release enormous energy, potentially sterilizing large areas of the surface. You'd need hundreds or thousands of such impacts over extended periods, and the technology to reliably redirect objects massing billions of tons doesn't currently exist. Even if you somehow added sufficient atmosphere, Mars lacks the magnetic field that protects Earth's atmosphere from being stripped away by solar wind. Mars lost its original atmosphere over millions of years through this process. Without a magnetic field, any terraformed atmosphere would gradually be lost to space on geological timescales. You'd need to either continuously replenish the atmosphere, accepting that terraforming is temporary, or find some way to generate an artificial magnetic field powerful enough to protect an entire planet, which is far beyond current or foreseeable technology. The timescales involved in terraforming are measured in centuries at minimum, more likely millennia. Even optimistic proposals suggest it would take hundreds of years of sustained, coordinated effort to significantly transform Mars's environment. That means multiple generations committing to the project, maintaining the technical capability and resources and avoiding any interruptions from wars, economic collapse, or political changes. Sustaining any human endeavor across such timescales is historically unprecedented. Resource extraction on Mars would initially focus on materials needed for survival, water ice for life support and propellant production, regolith for radiation shielding and construction, atmospheric carbon dioxide for making fuel, and breathing oxygen. But longer-term economic viability might depend on extracting resources valuable enough to justify the cost of transporting them to Earth. Mars has substantial deposits of iron, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, and other common elements. But these materials are abundant on Earth and in near-Earth asteroids. Transporting them from Mars's deep gravity offers no economic advantage. Rare earth elements or precious metals might be economically viable, but we have no evidence that Mars has particularly concentrated deposits of such materials, and finding them would require extensive geological surveys. The most economically valuable Martian resource might be its position as a staging point for outer solar system exploration and exploitation. Launching spacecraft from Mars requires less energy than launching from Earth due to Mars' lower gravity and lack of atmospheric drag at higher altitudes. A developed industrial base on Mars could manufacture propellant, spacecraft components, and supplies for missions to the asteroid belt, the outer planets, and their moons, potentially making Mars a hub for solar system commerce. But this economic model requires that the outer solar system offers resources worth extracting, that Mars develops sufficient industrial capability to manufacture spacecraft and equipment, and that the economics of this arrangement actually work out favorably compared to launching everything from Earth or manufacturing in zero-gravity facilities. These are enormous assumptions built on top of already speculative scenarios about Mars colonization success. Water ice on Mars exists in substantial quantities at the poles and in subsurface deposits at higher latitudes. The Phoenix lander confirmed water ice just below the surface at northern latitudes. Ground-penetrating radar from orbiting spacecraft has mapped extensive subsurface ice deposits, but accessing these deposits requires drilling or mining operations in extremely cold environments, where temperatures regularly drop below -100 degrees Celsius. Mining equipment would need to operate reliably in these temperature extremes, remain functional despite the abrasive dust, and be maintained by colonists who themselves are working in hostile conditions. The ice, once extracted, needs processing to remove perchlorates and other contaminants before it's suitable for life support or propellant production. Each step in this chain requires energy, equipment, technical expertise, and maintenance infrastructure. Martian dust is more than an inconvenience, it's a pervasive threat to operations. The dust is extremely fine, statically charged, and gets into everything. It coats solar panels, reducing power generation. It infiltrates mechanical systems, causing wear and jamming. It adheres to spacesuits and gets tracked into habitats despite precautions. On the Moon, lunar dust caused significant problems for Apollo missions despite the astronauts spending relatively brief periods on the surface. For permanent Mars habitation, managing dust becomes a constant operational challenge. Airlocks would need multiple stages of dust removal before allowing crew members to enter the main habitat. Brushing systems, air jets, and perhaps electrostatic dust removal would be necessary, but even with aggressive cleaning procedures, some dust would inevitably make it inside. Over time, dust accumulation in filters, ventilation systems, equipment, and living spaces would require constant maintenance and cleaning. The dust also poses health risks. Fine particles can be inhaled deep into lungs, potentially causing respiratory problems similar to those experienced by miners and workers exposed to industrial dust on Earth. The chemical composition of Martian dust, including perchlorates and possibly other reactive compounds, might make it more harmful than ordinary Earth dust. Long-term exposure could lead to chronic respiratory disease, and medical treatment options on Mars would be limited. Seasonal changes on Mars are more extreme than Earth in some ways, despite Mars' generally colder climate. Mars has a tilted rotation axis similar to Earth, producing seasons, but Mars' elliptical orbit is more eccentric than Earth's. This means the southern hemisphere summer occurs when Mars is closest to the Sun, making southern summers shorter but more intense, while northern summers are longer but milder. The global dust storms that occasionally envelop Mars tend to occur during southern summer, when temperature differences are greatest, driving powerful winds that lift dust into the atmosphere. These storms can last for months and block sunlight across the entire planet. A colony dependent on solar power would need sufficient battery storage or alternative power generation to survive extended periods of reduced sunlight. Planning mission timelines around the Martian seasonal cycle becomes essential for safety and operational efficiency. Temperature variations are extreme not just seasonally but daily. Near the equator, daytime temperatures might reach 20 degrees Celsius, relatively comfortable by Earth standards, but at night, temperatures plunge to -73 degrees Celsius or colder. This 100-degree daily temperature swing stresses materials, causes expansion and contraction that can lead to mechanical failures, and requires heating systems capable of maintaining comfortable interior temperatures despite the extreme cold outside. Thermal management becomes a constant engineering challenge. You need insulation sufficient to retain heat, but you also generate heat from power systems, equipment, and human metabolism that needs to be rejected. On Earth, you can open a window or use cooling systems that exchange heat with the outside air. On Mars, the thin atmosphere provides poor thermal conduction, making heat rejection more difficult. Radiator systems, heat pumps, and sophisticated thermal control are necessary, adding complexity and potential failure points. Construction on Mars would initially rely on prefabricated modules transported from Earth, but long-term colony growth requires using local materials. Martian regolith can potentially be sintered using microwaves or solar concentrators, fusing the dust particles into solid blocks suitable for construction. The Martian atmosphere's carbon dioxide could be captured and combined with water to create polymers for various applications. Iron and other metals can be extracted from regolith through processing, though this requires substantial energy and industrial equipment. 3D printing using Martian concrete made from regolith mixed with a binding agent has been demonstrated in principle and could enable construction of structures without transporting building materials from Earth. But the scale required for colony expansion is enormous. A habitat for 100 people might require thousands of cubic meters of enclosed, pressurized space. Printing structures at that scale requires large, sophisticated equipment and would take considerable time. Underground construction offers advantages for radiation protection and thermal stability. Lava tubes, natural tunnels formed by ancient volcanic activity, exist on Mars and could potentially be sealed and pressurized to create large, habitable volumes. But identifying suitable lava tubes, accessing them, assessing their structural stability, and sealing them sufficiently to hold pressure would be major engineering projects requiring extensive robotic and human work. The concept of building down rather than up makes sense on Mars. Excavating into the regolith or rock provides natural radiation shielding and thermal insulation. The overburden protects against micrometeorite impacts and provides structural support. But excavation requires heavy equipment, power for operation, and methods to prevent cave-ins and ensure structural stability. You'd also need to solve water infiltration problems if you're digging in regions with subsurface ice. Energy storage represents a critical challenge for any Mars colony. Solar power generation varies with time of day, season, weather conditions including dust storms and solar panel degradation over time. Nuclear power provides consistent output but has finite fuel and requires complex maintenance. In either case, you need substantial energy storage to buffer supply and demand, providing power when generation is insufficient and absorbing excess when generation exceeds consumption. Battery technology is heavy, degrades with charge-discharge cycles, and performs poorly at temperature extremes. Current lithium-ion batteries lose capacity over time and eventually need replacement. A Mars colony would need battery capacity measured in megawatt-hours to provide resilience against power generation interruptions. At current battery energy density, that means many tons of batteries, all of which eventually need replacing. Alternative energy storage methods like pumped hydro, compressed air, flywheels, or hydrogen fuel cells each have their own advantages and limitations. Pumped hydro requires elevation change and substantial water volume. Compressed air needs large pressure vessels and motor generator equipment. Flywheels require precision manufacturing and maintenance. Hydrogen storage involves explosive gases and efficiency losses in conversion. Each approach requires infrastructure, maintenance, and technical expertise. The skills base required for a viable colony is extraordinarily diverse. You need engineers across multiple disciplines: mechanical, electrical, chemical, civil, aerospace, and software. You need scientists, biologists, geologists, physicists, chemists, and medical researchers. You need technicians skilled in maintaining life support systems, power generation, communication equipment, and countless other systems. You need medical professionals, doctors, nurses, surgeons, and mental health specialists. You need agricultural specialists who understand controlled environment farming. You need people skilled in manufacturing, machining, welding, and fabrication. Beyond technical skills, you need people who can cook nutritious meals from limited ingredients, who can manage logistics and inventory, who can coordinate complex schedules, who can maintain morale and organize social activities, who can teach children, and who can mediate disputes. Each colonist would need to be proficient in multiple areas because the small population means you can't have deep specialists in every possible field. Training such a diverse, multi-skilled workforce takes years. Medical school alone requires 8 years or more, including residency. Engineering degrees take 4 to 6 years, followed by years of practical experience before someone is truly expert. If you're selecting colonists who need multiple skill sets, you're looking at people who have dedicated decades to education and training. These are highly valuable individuals who have significant opportunities on Earth. Convincing them to leave Earth permanently for the dangerous, confined, difficult life on Mars requires compelling motivation beyond simple financial compensation. The opportunity cost of Mars colonization deserves serious consideration. Every dollar, every hour of engineering time, every brilliant mind dedicated to Mars colonization is a resource not being applied to problems on Earth. We face enormous challenges here: climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, deforestation, water scarcity, food security, pandemic diseases, nuclear proliferation, and persistent poverty affecting billions of people. The argument that humanity needs a backup planet in case Earth becomes uninhabitable contains a logical flaw. If we lack the wisdom and capability to maintain Earth's habitability despite inheriting a planet perfectly suited to human life, with breathable air, drinkable water, moderate temperatures, and protective magnetic field, what confidence should we have in our ability to make an inhospitable planet like Mars habitable? Terraforming Mars would be vastly more difficult than preventing Earth's environmental degradation. That said, the counter-argument has merit too. Humans have historically thrived by exploring, expanding, and developing new capabilities. The technologies developed for space exploration have produced numerous beneficial applications on Earth: satellite communications, GPS, weather forecasting, materials, science advances, medical technologies, and countless other innovations. The inspiration provided by space exploration motivates young people to pursue careers in science and engineering, generating long-term benefits beyond the direct applications. Mars colonization might be better understood not as an insurance policy against Earth's destruction, but as an expression of human curiosity, ambition, and the drive to expand our capabilities. We explore not because it's easy or immediately practical, but because humans are curious, because challenges inspire us, and because expanding the boundaries of what's possible often leads to unexpected benefits. The economic models for Mars colonization remain highly speculative. SpaceX's Elon Musk has suggested that Mars colony transport costs might eventually drop to around $200,000 per person, making Mars colonization accessible to perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of people willing to sell their Earth assets and emigrate. But this cost estimate assumes dramatic reductions in launch costs through full reusability of the Starship vehicle, economies of scale from frequent flights, and propellant production on Mars to enable return flights. Even if launch costs drop dramatically, the total cost of establishing and maintaining a Mars colony extends far beyond transportation. Life support systems, habitats, power generation, manufacturing equipment, medical facilities, communication infrastructure, vehicles, and countless other requirements all need to be transported from Earth or manufactured on Mars using equipment transported from Earth. The capital investment required would be measured in hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars before the colony achieves anything approaching self-sufficiency. Who pays for this? Government funding for Mars colonization competes with countless other priorities. Space exploration budgets are a small fraction of total government spending, and Mars colonization would require sustained investment over decades with no immediate return. Political support for such long-term projects is difficult to maintain when administrations change every few years and priorities shift. Private funding faces different challenges. Investors expect returns on investment. What return does Mars colonization provide? Tourism might generate some revenue, but the market for $500,000 tickets to spend years traveling to and from Mars in cramped spacecraft, followed by a stay in a confined, dangerous habitat, is probably limited. Resource extraction might eventually become profitable, but requires enormous upfront investment with highly uncertain returns on timescales measured in decades. Philanthropic funding from individuals motivated by the vision of expanding human civilization rather than financial return could contribute significantly, but even the wealthiest individuals have finite resources. Elon Musk's personal fortune, while vast, is insufficient to fund Mars colonization alone. He needs SpaceX to be a profitable company that can self-fund Mars development from revenue generated by Earth orbit operations like Starlink satellite internet service. The question of mission architecture for Mars colonization involves fundamental decisions about how to approach the endeavor. Do you send small crews initially, establishing a minimal presence that gradually expands? Or do you wait until technology and resources allow sending large groups, building substantial infrastructure from the outset? Do you focus on a single colony location, concentrating resources and people, or establish multiple smaller outposts to explore different regions and provide redundancy? The flags and footprints approach that characterized Apollo, where governments fund missions primarily for prestige and scientific value with no intention of permanent presence, clearly won't achieve colonization. The sustained presence approach, maintaining continuous human occupation while gradually building capability, seems more promising but requires decades of sustained commitment. NASA's current Mars exploration plans focus on robotic missions and eventual human missions in the 2030-something timeframe, with crew members spending perhaps several hundred days on the surface before returning to Earth. This is exploration, not colonization. It's valuable for science and technology development, but doesn't establish permanent human presence. Private ventures like SpaceX's Mars ambitions are more explicitly focused on colonization, but face the resource and technology challenges we've discussed. The timeline Musk has suggested, with uncrewed Starship missions to Mars as early as the late 2020s and crewed missions potentially by the early 2030s, is extremely ambitious. Achieving those goals would require overcoming enormous engineering challenges on extremely tight schedules. International cooperation could accelerate Mars colonization by pooling resources, sharing costs, and bringing together diverse expertise from multiple nations and space agencies. The International Space Station demonstrates that such cooperation is possible, though not without significant challenges. Managing a collaborative Mars program involving NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, CNSA, ISRO, and private entities would be vastly more complex than ISS cooperation, but potentially more achievable than any single entity attempting Mars colonization alone. However, geopolitical tensions, competing national interests, technology transfer restrictions, and differing priorities make such cooperation difficult to achieve. Space programs are often closely linked to military capabilities and national security interests, creating reluctance to share sensitive technologies. Economic competition and prestige considerations can make nations prefer independent capabilities over collaborative dependence. The legal framework for Mars colonization, as mentioned earlier, remains underdeveloped. The Outer Space Treaty provides basic principles but doesn't address many practical questions about property rights, resource extraction, jurisdiction, liability, and governance. New international agreements specifically addressing colonization and settlement would be necessary, but achieving consensus among spacefaring nations on contentious issues like property rights would be challenging. Some have proposed that Mars should be governed as a global commons, with resources shared equitably among all humanity and colonization coordinated through international bodies. Others argue for recognizing property rights and territorial claims for entities that invest in development, creating economic incentives for colonization. These different visions reflect fundamentally different values about property, capitalism, international cooperation, and how human civilization should expand beyond Earth. The question of who gets to go to Mars if opportunities are limited raises issues of fairness and selection criteria. If early colonies can only accommodate small numbers of people, how are they chosen? Wealth-based selection, where those who can afford the cost get to go, seems unfair and would skew the population toward wealthy individuals who may not have the skills or temperament suited for frontier living. Skills-based selection makes practical sense, but excludes many people who might want to go but lack specialized training. Lottery systems would be democratic but might select individuals poorly suited for the challenges. Application and interview processes are subject to bias and favor those skilled at presenting themselves rather than necessarily the most capable. Any selection system will face criticism for being unfair or discriminatory, and the people chosen will carry enormous responsibility as representatives of humanity. The environmental conditions on Mars also include electrical phenomena that are poorly understood. Dust devils, small whirlwinds that lift dust into the atmosphere, are common on Mars and have been observed by various landers and rovers. These dust devils are sometimes quite large, reaching several kilometers in height, though they're generally weaker than Earth tornadoes due to the thin atmosphere. The static electricity generated by blowing dust can create substantial electrical fields. Measurements suggest that Martian dust storms might generate voltages high enough to cause electrical discharges, essentially lightning within the dust clouds. For electronic equipment and human crew members, such electrical phenomena could pose risks ranging from equipment damage to potential injury.